Hey everyone, and welcome back to the second part of the different types of surfboards. If you missed the first video about the most common shapes and designs of surfboards, make sure you check it out in the link up here or in the description below. So let's continue. The structure of a surfboard consists of a foam plank covered with resin, and in its center there is a stringer made of wood to add strength.
So most surfboards are going to be made of either a PU type of foam or EPS type of foam. That's kind of the most popular ones you'll see out there. EPS tends to be a little bit lighter and is a newer material that shapers have started using in the construction of surfboards. They're going to be wrapped with fiberglass cloth and some sort of resin, be it epoxy resin or a polyurethane, will be used to finish the surfboard. Then you can have a lot of different finishes, gloss finish, sanded finish, and so on. But in general, that's the basic component. They'll have a stringer down the middle, which adds rigidity to the board. But those are what you'd expect to see on most surfboards in the marketplace.
It might be worth adding that different materials use different strengths and flex. So in general, high performance boards have low density and will weigh less, and big wave boards will have high density and weigh more. In every aspect of surfboard design, we're always going to find a certain balance that's between speed and maneuverability. So if you increase one, you tend to decrease the other. One of the main features that affects the board's ability to generate speed and perform maneuvers is the rocker. Rocker is basically the curve of the surfboard, a banana shape that you see when you look at the profile of the surfboard. The curve of the rocker helps the board fit in the steep part of the wave and helps avoid nosedives. Because the tip is above water, it also allows for more maneuverability in the pocket where the wave is its strongest.
Yeah, so rocker is really important on surfboards. And when you're picking a surfboard, it's really important to understand not just what's happening with the rocker, but it translates to what kind of wave you're going to be surfing. In mushier, weaker waves, you tend to want to have a little bit less rocker on your board. It allows you to plane faster and just overall get into the wave a little bit quicker. When the waves get a little bit steeper and a little bit more critical, it's good to have a little bit more rocker, not too much because that can create drag, but just enough that allows you to drop down the face and make those bottom turns and get into the pocket a lot faster than if you had a low rocker board. So when you are choosing a board, just pay attention to those things. A lot of beginners will go towards a less rocker because it gives them that flotation and that movement that they enjoy. And the better surfers will tend to go to something with a little bit more rocker. But again, it all depends on the type of wave you're surfing, as that is also important when you're picking a surfboard.
The outline of the surfboard is what you see when you look at it from the top. Basically, how the nose and the tail look like. So Nigel, let's talk about the nose a little bit.
Yeah, the nose of a surfboard, again, all this stuff, remember guys, relate together in the overall construction of a board. So the nose does have some relation to the rocker. Nose of a surfboard, a little bit fuller nose. You'll see those mostly on long boards or beginner boards or boards that work well in mushy waves, can plane water very comfortably, and they're more stable. As the nose gets a little bit pointier, you start to lose a little bit of stability, but you can get into some of those steeper waves that we were talking about before a little bit easier. And then when you have a true pointy nose, kind of like what you would see on shortboards, that gives you the most maneuverability, and that paralleled with the rocker and the outline of the board gives you different types of performance on what board you're choosing. So if we want to recap, pretty much rounder, fuller nose, great for longboarding, for beginners, for just kind of getting your feet under you. You have the mid kind of slightly fuller. That's a good fun shape. Normally surfboards tend to have that on it. And as the nose gets a little bit pointier, performance surfboards tend to come with those more often than other boards.
The tail of the surfboard mostly comes into play after pop-up and in every maneuver. In general, a wider back gives you maximum speed, so lots of small waveboards like the Grovelers will have much wider nose and a wide tail. The more lift the tail creates, the more traction it will lose with the water. So high speed and big waveboards will go for narrow tails. Performance in these waves require more control, as the wave itself already gives you all the speed you need. Okay, we have several types of tails. Let's talk about some of the main ones.
Yeah, some of the main types of tail that you'll see on surfboards. I think the squash tail is probably one of the most popular. That's just kind of a little bit of a square tail, great for just all around use on smaller waves to medium-sized waves. You have the pintail, which, as you mentioned, will work on bigger waves. You have the swallowtail, which is kind of a two-pointed tail, and that one gives you a little bit more pivot, works really well in beach break and in punchy wave conditions. Then you have different variations of that. You have like a rounded squash, which is a little bit softer. You got a rounded pin. You know, there's definitely a lot of tail variations, but the most popular one is probably the squash and the swallowtail.
The underside of the surfboard will affect how the water flows under the board.
Yeah, so the underside of the board will have different kinds of concaves, convex designs, channels, different things that allows the water to flow differently, and it gives you different levels of performance. Shapers pay particular attention to this, and I think outside of the shape, a lot of guys who still hand shape boards, they're known for making like very good variations of these. So it's a very important part of the surfboard for sure.
So what are the differences between, let's say, a concave, a convex, and a flat underboard?
They will provide the water to channel differently based on what it is, right? And I'm not a full expert at this, but basically, in theory, if you think about it, when you have a V, right, it gives the board a point to pivot a little bit, so it makes it a little bit looser, but also channels the water very quickly because there's less friction. There's something that kind of digs into the water there. When it's flat, you can imagine that it's a little bit more stable. Not that it creates suction, but I guess technically it would, because the water channels and goes through the bottom of the board very smoothly and out the back. So it's a nice, smooth, and stable ride. And then you have options like when you do channels in the back, it even channels the water out much faster. So those boards tend to fly. And then what's kind of cool about it is that you can change where you position either the V or the flat, or you know the different shapes, and you can have a double V. All these things, in essence, just help the board ride slightly different. And different boards will have different versions of those. And as you become a better surfer, you start kind of knowing what you like, and you in picking a board, will look for those things to help maximize your surfing ability.
Okay, Nigel, you mentioned the fin setup. So what can we say about that?
So fins, if you think about it as a car, there'd be the tires. If you think about it as a boat, it'd be the rudder. So fins help drive the whole machine. It makes it work much differently in different conditions. On the basic level, normally you will have a thruster setup, which is 3 fins. You can have a quad, you can have a single, which usually will show up on a longboard. And based on what fin system you have, you can technically change how the board rides by setting it up in different ways. This is really great for people who maybe want one board, and you know the conditions may change if you're at a beach break, if you go somewhere else. Having the option of adding different fins and different configurations could let that one board ride very differently. So as you're picking a board, as a beginner or even better surfer, a lot of people will look at the fin configuration and see what they prefer, you know. But fins are a very important part of the board. I don't think the board would work very well without them.
One more thing, if I had a board and the option of putting a thruster, so a 3-fin setup, or a quad, what would be the difference?
That's a great question. So in general, thrusters have been around for a long time. They provide hole and great pivot. When the waves kind of get big and steep, a lot of people like that reliability and that sureness of a thruster. So you'll see those a lot. Quads, they've been around for a while, but I think they gained popularity sometimes in the 2000s. They're just fast. They're much faster. They allow you to pivot, and they channel the water very differently. I used to surf a quad religiously, and I'm back to a thruster now. But basically, it's just a slight performance difference. The quads, I find, are faster off the takeoff. They get you down the line much quicker. Sometimes can be a little bit wobbly based on the wave you're surfing, but Old Faithful is your thruster. You know, it'll work in pretty much every condition all the time.
I noticed that a lot of people are talking about the size of the board, but honestly, the actual size is just one factor out of many. And more importantly is the board's volume.
Yeah, volume is something that has come into play a lot. There's some shapers that still don't use it. Some of the old school guys, they don't believe in it. But I think it's very important because what volume tells you scientifically is really just how much water the board displaces. And for someone like myself, you know, I'm a little bit heavier. I want to surf a shorter board, but I don't want to struggle. So with the more volume, the board will obviously float higher, it'll paddle a bit easier. When you have less volume, the board sits lower in the water, so you have to paddle a little bit harder. So based on, I guess, you know, if you add all the dimensions together, the length, the width, the thickness, the volume, it helps you pick a board that works really well for you based on your body weight and the weight and where you're surfing, you know, so the conditions. A lot of brands will actually have volume calculators to help you determine the best volume for your body weight.
So let's say a beginner comes with a foam board and wants to progress to the next board. How would you determine what's the best volume for this person?
So this is an interesting one because although volume is very important, ability is important. So usually here at Station, what we do is we start by just trying to understand where they're at, right? So if the person, they're comfortably standing, they're going left or right, then I determine based on the board they were surfing, even the soft boards have a volume on it, and most soft boards have a pretty high volume. So if they're okay with dropping down in liters, I would still give them something big because just switching materials creates a whole different factor. If they got the same board, same length, but fiberglass or EPS versus foam, right away the volume drops and it gives them a little more of a challenge. So I think for a lot of people that come off a soft board, we love to put them on something a little bit longer or a fun shape based on their ability level. But a bigger board in the high 50s, you know, maybe 60s even, you know, for people who are still really trying to figure out their footing, but they want to move to a hard surfboard, works for them. And it goes into all what we've been discussing all night. That mixed with the width, mixed with the thickness of the board, mixed with the kind of tail, the rocker, all these factors come into play when we decide to help someone find that next board after their soft top.
It's important to know that some boards can have similar size, but with the differences in the shape and the thickness, they will have a completely different volume, even a difference of up to 10 or 20%. So let's look at one example.
Yeah, so a good example of this is actually the one that's been in front of us all night. So this board is technically a groveler. It's a 6.0, and I believe this guy has 42 liters. So that's a board that'll float you, that'll float me, no problem. And here we have a similar board, similar height, and this guy is a standard short board, and it's at 26 liters. So I mean, obviously the shape here is slightly different, but here are two boards, similar height, very big volume difference, and they'll perform different in different waves. So really important to take a look at the volume when you're starting to pick a surfboard, and know that, you know, volume works in, you know, it's not just big boards that have a lot of volume. You can have a smaller board that has, you know, a lot of volume, and you can have, you know, a bigger board with less volume. So as you're looking, just pay attention to all those things.
Putting aside our performance level, the volume we need can change by the conditions of the wave. So in general, in good conditions, we have enough speed from the wave, so we need less volume. And in small, mushy waves, we don't have a lot of power, so we need more volume. And in the bigger waves, we need to generate a lot of power so we can get into the wave, so we need more volume. Now that you understand volume and design, the dimensions of the boards connect the two.
Yeah, so remember that the length of the board is not the only factor when you're choosing a board. You need to take into consideration all of the other measurements of the board, but typically things to keep in mind is that longer boards will give you more paddle power. They'll cruise a little bit nicer, you'll catch waves a little bit easier, Those mid-length boards that we talk about are fun shapes. Wider boards will also give you great plane and power, but are going to be a little bit less maneuverable as you're going down the line. And the short boards, based on which one you have, whether it's a groveler or a standard short board, will give you tons of maneuverability and will probably be a little bit more fun as you're trying to get a little bit more aggressive with your surfing.
Alright everyone, I want to thank Nigel from Station RBNY in the Rockaways. Make sure you check out his online store for all your surf gear and apparel in the link in the description. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I hope this video was helpful in understanding the basics behind of surfboard construction and that it will help you figure out the choice of your next board. As always, I'd love to hear from you, so please post in the comments below. And if you'd like to support the channel, please subscribe. See you in the water!